Welcome to Don't Quote Me on That. One day we will have an intro, but today is not that day.
Hello, hello, hello. I'm Kalina. And welcome back to Don't Quote Me on That. I paused because I wanted to pretend Elanor was here for a second and let you live in the fantasy a little longer. But once again, it is me. I am solo. But you're not seeing my face if you're watching this on YouTube the last few weeks. So that's, an interesting change of scenery, I suppose. Anyway, this is going to be a quick little episode. I decided to take you guys through a book I've read for every month of the year. I was thinking about doing like a smaller version of this on our TikTok. So I was like, let me just do it now. But yeah, I was kind of torn between doing a song I've added to my playlist every month this year, but that got too complicated because I add a lot of songs, whereas I haven't read as many books. So I read most books on my Kindle just because I travel a lot and was like not living at home. So like carrying around physical books back and forth is tricky, obviously. So if I have the book on my little Kindle, I will read the quotes out to you but basically I'm just going to give you a recap, kind of rank them. I will tell you for now, I already know what my favorite books are going to be. And then also, I haven't finished reading anything for November or this month. Obviously, we're only a couple of days into this month, so I think that's fair. I should have something finished by the end of the year. But I didn't technically finish my November book in November, but we're going to count it because I don't have anything else to talk about. But that's a spoiler for later. We're going to get right into it, and then I'm going to go to bed. So in January, I read 5 books. And then my thing with reading is I tried to change up the genre I read every book. So I used to read just nonstop when I was a kid. It was so bad that my mom banned reading at the dinner table, like when I was eating at the table at any point in time. So I used to like sit down and read the back of like the cereal boxes because I wasn't allowed to have books at the table. I always use that. I'm like, no, nowadays, kids these days, they can't have their phone at the table. Me, I couldn't have books, which like, I know how that sounds, but I say it like that because I know how it sounds. So I used to read a lot. And then something I think happens to a lot of people is I was in school, specifically high school, college, and just didn't really have the time to read for fun. Not just because I didn't have time, but also like any sort of reading I was doing was for class and mandatory and not necessarily as enjoyable. The one thing that like sticks out to me are the couple books, I suppose. When I was in high school, we read Of Mice and Men. We read The Great Gatsby. I enjoyed those. When I was in middle school, we read 1984, which I thought was a horrendous book. And some Shakespeare plays, things like that. And I like the plays and stuff. But anyway, unimportant. I read a lot. I enjoyed some of the stuff. And like I enjoyed a good chunk of the stuff I read for school. It just was like, it was for school. I wasn't reading necessarily to enjoy it. I was reading to get something out of it so I could write about it or discuss it or whatever the assignment was. So I made an active effort this last year because 2022 was the first year I had gone into it not having school, like, in my whole life, which was weird, but I was like, I really like reading, I miss reading, I have a lot more time on my hands, so let me get back into it. So one way I did that was not pressure myself to read anything specific, just whatever struck my fancy, and like, everyone's got reading slumps, so not to like be like, I'm gonna read X amount of books every month. I did say I wanted to read 25 books this year. I just did that because I think in 2020, my goal was to read a book a month, and I think I hit like 15 books. And my goal was to slowly work my way up to a book a week because I saw someone else do that. And I thought that was a lot because especially because books are varying lengths. So you have to be like kind of careful about how you pick them. And you never know what might come up in your week. But anyway, so my goal was I started with the book a month and I wanted to work my way up to a book a week. Never really happened. In 2021, I was very much like just reading when I could, with no pressure on number. So then this year, I was like, okay, well, my goal is to read. I think 25 books is a good number. That's 2 a month, and then an extra. And my mom was like, okay, well, I'll read 25. So I was like, okay, great. Together we'll read 50. And then I would like everyone to know that my mom, as of like up to like June, hadn't even finished one book. So I was like, I'm really pulling all of the weight here. But anyway, actually, I got to check up on her and see how many books she's at, because it might be 2 if I'm lucky. So I don't think we're hitting 50 collectively, but I definitely think I've hit the 25. Anyway, little backstory. I like to change up the genre of my book every time I read. Or at least I try to. So in January, I read 5 books. I read The Paris Apartment, which was a mystery. I read Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which was, I guess you'd call it a literary fiction, which is a genre I just like understood the definition of this year because of this book. Then I read a Greek play that Antigone. I'm sure I'm butchering that, but I've seen a lot of quotes about it. I've said this on the show before, but anything about brothers makes me very sad, and that one is about a sister and her brother. Then I read Open Water, which was recommended by Jack Edwards, which is one of 2. He's one of 2 book YouTubers I follow, booktubers. And then I read Breakfast at Tiffany's because I love Audrey Hepburn, and I like Audrey Hepburn movies, obviously, because I like her. So my top book out of January was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I think I've talked about this book on the podcast, and this book was not even out of left field. I just thought the plot sounded nice, but I didn't know much about it going in. I just like read the little back cover summary, and it just took me by surprise how much I loved it. I was like, you know, when you read a good book and everything you do throughout the day, you're just in the back of your head, like thinking about, oh, what are these characters going to do? I wonder what happened. Like you just cannot wait to get home and look at it. That was me. I was like in the pool training, thinking about these characters. It was so good. It's about these 2 characters who meet when they're younger and kind of fall into a friendship and then fall out of the friendship and just meet up again later, run into each other accidentally when they're both in college, and just how their friendship develops as they fall in and out of it in their lives. And it's about relationships, but not in a romantic sense, but just the different types of relationships you can have with people and how they contribute to your life and the person that you are and the things that you do, and how they make you better, even if everything and every experience with them isn't necessarily positive, I would say, but how the human connection makes you better. And that book made me cry. I never cry at books, especially. That book had me just in tears. I had to like put it down and walk away because they felt like very real characters. Another thing I was trying to do this year is read more intentionally, because I could tell you, oh yeah, I liked the book, but I couldn't dissect why. But one thing I will say about Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, and forgive me, it is by Gabrielle Zevin. If you guys want to read it, it's so good. But what I can say about it is the characters felt like fully fleshed out people with like real concerns and drama and relationships and depth. And they were just believable as people, which drew you in. And then also kind of, because there was times where like you weren't rooting for the characters, the 2 main characters in particular. You were like, no, that was kind of a sucky thing you did, and you're not really on their side, but you still want to see where it goes. And I think that's the power of a good book. The first book I ever read like that was Gone Girl. It was the first time I didn't like anyone in the book, but I still like wanted to see what happened. And not that I despised anyone in Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow to that level, but just the idea of like, even when you're not wholeheartedly on board with the characters' actions and decisions, you still want it to turn out well for them. But if you're looking for a good read that is engaging, and I think especially if you are someone who finds your friendships or your non-romantic relationships in your life, like very major parts of your life, are very significant to you, you'll enjoy this book. If you enjoy chronicles, I don't know, like following people throughout their lives, like in different periods, you'll like this book. If you like good writing, you'll like this book. I just think everyone should read this book. It's fantastic. I'm sure no one will be surprised. This is like in my top 3 for the year. Honestly, when I read it, I was like, I already have my favorite book of 2023, and I haven't even finished January. But there are 2 contenders at the end, well, a little later on, for a top book of the year. Before I forget, I'll read you some quotes from tomorrow, because I read that on the Kindle. So let's see what I've got highlighted here. This first quote, I think, sums up the book in its entirety, but also I love it so much because this is how I feel about platonic relationships and platonic expressions of love, because I feel like very often they are demoted, are considered lesser than romantic relationships for some reason, when I think that platonic relationships, the friendships in your life and the bonds you form with people with no reason other than you enjoy being around them, are some of the most meaningful and most moving and most important relationships in your life. So this first quote is, it's a quote, one of the characters is saying it, and he says, it's more than romantic. It's better than romance. It's friendship. And he's talking about his relationship with the female main character, and these are the 2 characters that fall in and out of each other's lives throughout the story. Then another one says, Daedalus, I have found that the most intimate relationships allow for a great deal of privacy within them. And something, to be loved is to be known, but also before we become one, we must be 2. You have to be 2 separate entities before you can be one unit. And someone who loves you and knows you very well and has, is very close to you allows you to be that other person without their input or influence, Anyway, everyone go read tomorrow. Absolutely stunning book. Then in February, kind of a slow month for me, I read Love is a Dog from Hell by Charles Bukowski and The Chalk Man by C.J. Tudor, because, again, changing genres every time I read, but I really wanted to read some more classics, because the only things I've read are Of Mice and Men and The Great Gatsby, which I like both of those, but I feel like they're not really I don't know. I feel like I could have read more, obviously. So I was like, let me read a poetry classic. It'd probably take me less time because they're broken up, and so I can get through this a little easier. Love is a Dog from Hell had me going, what were people on about when I talk about Charles Bukowski? Because I don't get it. I do not get it. I do not think it's something I am meant to get necessarily. I do think it leans very heavily into the unreliable or not agreeable, hard to enjoy narrator, but my God. So, not to say that I loved The Chalk Man, which was a thriller, but I just really didn't get Love is a Dog from Hell. Some nice quotes I got from there. And there was, if I recall, there was 2, possibly 3, but I'm pretty sure it was 2 poems where I was like, these are nice lines. I get it. But for the most part, absolutely not. Some quotes from Love is a Dog from Hell, just because I don't have a lot from The Chalk Man, is, and if you have the ability to love yourself first. And then he says, there's time, and if there's not, that's all right too. Another good one, don't undress my love, you might find a mannequin. Don't undress the mannequin, you might find my love. And the first one I highlighted, which I just think is funny, is Sandra could probably break a man's heart. I hope she finds one. Things like that. I was like, you go, Charles Bukowski. I get it. But that was just so few and far between. So anyway, we're going to go on to the book that I enjoyed the most, which was The Chalk Man, which was a thriller, I suppose is the right word, about this group. It was very much giving, as the kids say. It by Stephen King, but British, which also I forgot it was British half the time. But anyway, about this group of kids who, bike around together and they're best friends, blah, 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 blah. And there's one girl in the group, of course there is. And there is a murder. Or a girl goes missing. No, there's a murder. there's a murder, and they find her body, the kids. And it flashes back and forth between, like, the events leading up to that in their childhood and then the present day of the narrator. Big plot twist at the end that made you kind of go, oh, this guy, narrator was not great, in case you hadn't thought that already, which I had. But it was good. I haven't read very many thrillers, none that I can think of, like, that I could think to name before this. So this was my first, it was one of my first, if not my first thriller. And so I enjoyed it. It, like, definitely did the job, for lack of a better word. Very much like I said, Stephen King's It, but self-aware of that fact, and not in a supernatural way, which I was glad I didn't lean into that. It was a book. I read it. I liked it. If you want, like, a nice simple thriller or just getting into it, I would recommend it, because that's what it was for me. Or if you're looking for a quick read that's not uber predictable, but not, like, too twisty and turny that you got to remember all these extreme details, then I think that's a good one to go with. On to March. In March, I read 4 books. I read Heart of Darkness by A. Joseph Conrad. I read If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I read Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. And The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. Really good month for me, March. And so I kind of feel bad about having to pick a book, because I really enjoyed almost all of those, actually. But if I had to pick a winner, it would be If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, because I was trying to get into my dark academia girly era, and that was recommended as a dark academia book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was about a group of friends at this, like, college, and they're doing this intense Shakespeare class, so it's just the 5 of them, I want to say. 7 of them. There's probably 7 of them. Obviously, mostly men. Someone ends up dead. One of them, they're all under investigation. Also, flashing back, not as frequently, like the start of the book was in the present, most of the book's then in the past, and then we catch up to the present and then move forward from there. Fantastic plot twist. If you know, the last lines of that book had me literally jaw open in shock, and I wanted so badly to share it with someone, but I had no one to share it with because no one else was reading the book with me. So literally the last 5 words of this book just rock you to your core. Not in an emotional way, just in a oh my god, like I don't want to spoil anything, but oh my god. So I really loved If We Were Villains, but I feel like this is an unfair month because Heart of Darkness was another, like, quote-unquote classic I was trying to power through, and I get why it is important and why it's a significant novel, but it wasn't the right time for me to read it, 1, and 2, not necessarily something I'd pick up. It's like a commentary on, the white man in Africa and colonization and all that stuff, which, like, important and I could be into, but just, I think I picked it up more in interest for it being a classic than in interest of the plot, which is what you should never do. Then I also read Everything I Never Told You, which was this look at a family's life after the oldest daughter dies, and just kind of the different ways it affects them and all the things that kind of led up, not necessarily to her death directly, but led up to the circumstances around her life that then in turn would have led to her death. I thought it was really interesting. I don't know if I'd call this a lit fiction, but like character study, because we bounced around from character to character, obviously. Like the girl's mom, her dad, her siblings, people in the peripheral of her life. Sometimes we even bounce to her perspective, even though we never met her alive. When we come into the story, she's dead, which is not a spoiler. I promise you. That's like in the description of the book on the back. But I just thought it was really interesting and impactful, and it made me feel a little weepy. Then The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, also a fantastic read. That was definitely literary fiction, or maybe historical fiction. No, lit fiction, because it's based off of a real school in Florida, but it's not the actual school that they're writing about, where basically they took juvenile kids who, like, ended up in jail a lot. They were taken to this, it's basically like a reform school, but just the awful things that they were done to them, the atrocities that were committed against them. And it's based on, like I said, a real school in Florida where it was discovered that there was like bodies of hundreds of these boys on the property. And what used to happen is they'd abuse them and kill them in the process of abusing them, and then bury them and then say they ran off. And no one checked for them because they either didn't have family or they were considered to be delinquents who did things like this regularly. But just the effect it has on their lives. And this one also had another plot twist, which I read a lot of books this year, I'm realizing now, with great plot twists, and not books that you would expect one to be in. Like The Chalk Man, that's a thriller. I'm not surprised there was a plot twist in there. That was like the point of reading a thriller. But The Nickel Boys and If We Were Villains knocked me out of my seat. So good. And The Nickel Boys, I felt like the narrator in the present. I also apparently read a lot of books where we bounce back and forth in terms of time and POV. But the narrator in the present was like very aware of... the narrator in the present felt like a very real character. It was very cognizant of I can't say anything without spoiling it. Played the role very well, is what I will say. So that was March. If We Were Villains by Emma Rio. If you're into dark academia, if you like Shakespeare, if you were like a theater kid or a theater kid adjacent, which I consider myself to be a theater kid adjacent. I was a tech kid, which might actually be worse, but we're not going to delve into that. But any of those sort of things, you like broody boys, you like unrequited love, you like angst, read If We Were Villains. So, in April, I read 5 books. I read The Secret History by Donna Tartt, because again, in my dark academia era. Then I read Normal People by Amos Sadly Rooney, who I will be suing for damages. Then I read Legendborn and Bloodmarked, which are the first 2 books in a series by Tracy Dion. Briefly, going to recap The Secret History. Oh my god, that book was so long. I think if I had read it first, I would have enjoyed it a lot more, but because of how much I enjoyed If We Were Villains, and then also I'm more of a Shakespeare girly than a Greek classics girly, and obviously the premise and the plot and is driven by Greek classics in The Secret History, I didn't enjoy it so much. I didn't expect it to be so long, and I felt like I was reading it forever. But it's like, it's a staple in the genre. So I read it, and it was good. I just thought it would be better. Another great ending. Not so much a plot twist, just I'd heard about the book so much, and also very frequently around this time that I read it, that I thought I knew the gist of what happened. So the ending really took me for a spin. Then, like I said, I read The Secret History. I read Normal People by Sally Rooney, which so good. I don't think I could handle watching that show. Has some lovely quotes. My favorite in the book is, she believes Marianne lacks warmth, by which she means the ability to beg for love from people who hate her. And I just felt very, for lack of a better word, seen in this book in a way I probably don't want to delve into too much. But just, and then also, like, I saw this, like, purported, and usually it was the show, but purported as, like, such a romantic book, and like, I don't think this is a spoiler, but he doesn't treat her very nicely. What's your man's name? We got Marianne and Connor? I think his name's Connor. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's Connor. Just, he doesn't treat Marianne very well, like, in the beginning. But another one that I think is about relationships, and not just romantic, even though that does come up and that is a major theme, the relationships that shape you and change you and carry weight in your life. And this quote, everyone knows this quote from Normal People. Marianne, he said, "I'm not a religious person, but I do sometimes think God made you for me." And I want to watch the show so badly because I want to hear Paul Mescal say these things. And also because I heard that the show was a very good and very direct book-to-screen adaptation. But I just don't think I could handle hearing those things said. So for my own mental health and for your sake, I won't do that. So that was the Normal People. Then I read The Forest of Stolen Girls Good book. It felt very modern, even though it took place in in the 1700s or something in Korea, if I recall correctly. And it's about this girl who goes to look for her missing father, who's a cop, and she ends up on this island that has a forest, and the girls keep going missing in them from the different tribes. The title kind of says it all. And just the investigation that takes place and the people she encounters. I thought that was really good. Then we have The Forest of Starving Girls by June Her. Then we have Legendborn and Bloodmarked, which are 2 books by Tracy Deonn. Legendborn is the first one, obviously. Bloodmarked is the second one. And I didn't realize this was a series, and I didn't realize it was an unfinished series till after I finished Bloodmarked. Horrible decision. I just could. This is my new, not even Percy Jackson. Okay, so first of all, premise of the book, it's like, I don't want to say it's like Percy Jackson, but in terms of understanding the world, if you haven't heard anything about it, it's like Percy Jackson in the sense that this is about descendants of Arthur, like King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, right? Instead of demigods, we're those guys, but they obviously have powers and something's going on. And they fight demons in the same way that Percy Jackson, them fight demons, are like, same shebang in that sense, okay? You're with me. We kind of know what genre we're getting into. But lead character, black girl. Then there's wizards. Then they're on like a college campus, but it's young adult. But like not young adult that makes me feel like I'm 15 and reading this still. It's so well written. It touches on like racism and misogyny and generational trauma and forbidden love, because who doesn't love that, and like a little bit of a love triangle, even though it was very obvious there was only ever one decision for this girl. And it's just so good, and friendship is there at the center of it all, because she's got this little love triangle happening in both books, but what's really driving the story and what takes priority, because she doesn't have time for romance, literally, because she's trying to save the world and save her and keep herself alive and her friends alive, is the people who stand by her in the like the face of adversity. Oh my goodness. One complaint about the book, which was not anyone's fault, but I'm going to complain about it anyway, is one of the main characters has the same name as my dad. So took me a little while to get into the story because like for that reason, but also no one calls my dad by his government name. So after a while it was fine. But unfortunately, not at all objectively. I think objectively normal people, that's a lie. I take back what I said. Objectively, subjectively, Legendborn has it for me. Bloodmarked was good, but mostly because I was rooting for the love story in that. I don't feel like a lot of plot happened, but Bloodmark I prefer in terms of quotes alone and characters we met, specifically one character. But Legendborn, just setting up the world, I thought it was very well done. It didn't feel shoved in your face. I think when you're coming off the back of, but when you're in a genre such as the Percy Jackson genre, it's very easy to kind of feel like you're shoving the premise down people's throat, because you want to explain it just in case someone hasn't seen or read Percy Jackson, but like you don't really need to. So I thought that was very well done by Tracy. And the deep cut I wanted to tell you guys about was Legendborn. Legendborn Cycle is what it's called. Is my not Percy Jackson, and I used to read Percy Jackson every year, not on purpose, but what happens is that like once a year around the same time, like August, September, I'd be like, I am itching to like read Percy Jackson. That book is so funny because I do think that book's hilarious. I still laugh at it every time I read it. And so I'd read the first one, and then from there I just couldn't put them down. I'd read them all, right? But worse than that, there was this series called The Chronicles of Ancient Darkness that my godmother bought me the first couple of, and then I devoured them. This is my new that. My Chronicles of Ancient Darkness books are falling apart. I read them so much and just loved them and wanted to live them. And I cannot articulate anything well about those series or intelligently, but if you know, you know. It's about a boy and his wolf, and they're trying to save the world. It happens in like ancient times. So good. If you haven't read The Chronicles of Ancient Darkness, please do. I think I will make a lot more sense as a person. You know what? I'm going to like make on my little list. It's going to be like books that formed me. It's those. Movies that formed me. It's Peter Pan, the live action, and Spirit the Stallion of the Cimarron. And then like TV shows, which is like OG Law and Order. And then music, I guess, will be Hell Freezes Over by the Eagles. And then like you just consume all of those bits of media, and then I will make a lot more sense as a person. So I will leave you all with Legendborn and Bloodmarked are absolutely beautiful. However, if you don't want your heart broken, I would wait until at least the third book comes out. The third book is supposed to come out next year, early next year, I believe, and was supposed to be the last book. And I found out from Carrie Can Read on YouTube, which spoiled my day, that it's not the end of the series. And while I'm glad, now I have to wait longer to find out what happens, which is frustrating. But anyway, Legendborn Cycle, read it. In May, I read Dracula, and that was the only book I read in May. So Dracula is going to number 1 for May. Dracula took me an embarrassingly long time to read. It took me May and June to read, actually, now that I'm remembering this correctly. I don't have a book for June, but I did really enjoy it. Then in July, I read Streetwise by Roberta Cray, who was married to one of the Cray brothers. There were these twin brothers who allegedly ran a mob/gang in London. And she was married to one of them, the girl who wrote this book, so she knows what she's talking about, right? It was just like about this girl who becomes a driver for one brother who's a brother who's co-head of a mob, I guess, and just the shenanigans she ends up getting stuck in. And then that was August. Fine book. Kind of breezing through these. I didn't read a lot these months. And then so that was July. In August, I read To Kill a Mockingbird. I know I've talked to you guys about To Kill a Mockingbird because while I was reading To Kill a Mockingbird, I got a cat and named him Atticus. And I really enjoyed To Kill a Mockingbird a lot more than I thought I would. It felt both shorter and longer than it was, in the sense that I felt like I was reading it for a long time, but when it was over, I was like, I don't feel like there was a lot going on. Like, I feel like I need more from this story. I want to read more about Scout and Atticus and Jem and their cousin and like all, it felt like a very real world to me, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. And I get why it's such a pinnacle of its genre and pinnacle of literature just in general. So if I were to recommend any sort of quote-unquote classic, that would be the one, To Kill a Mockingbird. Then I read the months, I'm kind of foggy on the months for these. After To Kill a Mockingbird, I read this book called The Cold Vanish, which was really interesting. It's about people who go missing in national parks and national forests, and like why and what happens to them, and kind of the circumstances to lead to things like that. And I just thought that was really good. It's not something I was interested in terms of like, I don't go hiking or camping in national forests or near them, or I don't go Bigfoot hunting. I'm not like an adventurer in that sort of sense, but it was still really interesting to like learn about these people who, a lot of the stories that the book talked about were people who logically shouldn't have been going missing. Like, they're people who were fit and knew the trail and had done this hundreds of times and were young and sprite and sensible and prepared, and still like how tragedy can strike and they go missing or they die or whatever. So many things could happen, and how so often you don't even know what the answer is. And it was centered around one particular story of this guy looking for his son, but then interjected with like similar stories from different areas. And the outcome, whether the author of the book had like helped research and investigate directly or personally, or whether they had not, all of them had every story carried the same depth. So I thought that was really interesting. It took me a long time to read, not so much because it was hard to get to, but just I had like started a job over the summer, and I think it was kind of getting to the thick of it then. But I told everyone at work about that book, so I thought it was really good. The Cold Vanish is by John Billum. So if you want to check that out, I thought it was good. It was, going into it, I wasn't sure if it was going to be like thrillery, and it wasn't, but it still kept you very engaged and like, oh my God, what's going to happen next? And I felt sadness at the ending, even though I wasn't expecting a different ending, but it still got me. So I thought they did a very good job there. And like writing about a real people in a way that felt sensitive to their struggle, but objective enough to connect to the other stories and like the statistics of people going missing in these places. But that was September. In October, I read None Shall Sleep. This was my trying to like get more books in, trying to get back. I was like, felt like I was in a bit of a slump after The Cold vanished, because even though I really enjoyed it, I didn't feel like picking up another book. So I read a couple like cheesy ones that were like, one was None Shall Sleep, which is about this girl who survived a serial killer and this guy whose dad was killed by one, and they get recruited to work for the FBI, and they're both like, they kept emphasizing teenagers in this one, but like they were like 19, 20, you know what I mean? So like, and then, but before that I read The Naturals, which was, God, so cheesy. It was like this group of teens is recruited for their specific skills to work for the FBI, which like, these two books really had you suspending your belief to kind of get into the plot. Once you were into the plot, it was good, but like believing that, which is the case in The Naturals, that, you know, there's a bunch of teenagers that the FBI recruited on the DL to all live in this random house together with a caretaker because they all have specific skills. Like, one can always tell when you're lying. One can read the crime scene. One can, like... But did I find myself kind of, like, kicking my feet and giggling over the love triangle and, like, rooting for this main character? A little bit, yeah. It was a little embarrassing. But you gotta do what you gotta do to get back into reading. And sometimes a fun little stupid book where you pretend you're a teenage girl again, dreaming of her, you know. I'm a brunette girly, so I always root for the dark-haired fella in the books, in the love triangle. But, like, you know, dreaming of, when is that gonna happen to me? It's fun. I got through the books. I almost went and bought the sequel, but instead I decided to go with None Shall Sleep, because I figured it was, like, similar vein. Again, this girl who survives a serial killer and this guy whose dad gets killed by one are brought on this task force to invest. And, like, this one felt more like Criminal Mindsy in the sense that that was the new unit they were being brought in to help. But anyway, they get to interview this teenage serial killer. I don't know if get to is the right word. They interview this teenage serial killer. But I read those, and then I also read Tokyo Ever After and Tokyo Dreaming by Amiko Jean, which is book 1 and 2 in a series. I'm pretty sure there's only 2 books in the series. But anyway, Princess Diaries-esque in the sense that this girl finds out she is the crown princess of Japan. What more do I need to say, okay? Sometimes you gotta live in your little fantasy, and I loved it, and I had a really good time, and I always say that I'm Team Jacob, but not for Bella, for me. And that's how I felt about the love interest in the first book, because there is a love interest. There's a love triangle that develops in the second book that he's still in, and I'm Team him, but for me and me alone. I thought it was fun. I don't think this is one of those books you read like tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, like I was talking about, that you read and you're like, these characters don't feel fully fleshed out and like real people, blah, 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 blah. Because, like, it's about a girl finding out she's the crown princess of Japan. I'm not looking for realism, you know? And then that was October. I don't think, just to reiterate, there's no shame in, you know, reading what you gotta read to get out of that slump. Sometimes, to get out of a reading slump, I read Percy Jackson and The Lightning Thief, and then next thing I know, I've gone through all of those books in the Hero of Olympus series. So, do what you gotta do. Last, but finally not least, at the end of October, beginning of November, I started a book called Writers in Disguise. It was written by Patrick Anderson Jr., which is about Miami in the 80s during, like, the cocaine craze and, like, gang violence. And it tells the tale of, if I recall correctly, 4 or 5 characters, and you follow them each, and POV changes each chapter, but you follow them throughout this same time period and kind of see how all of their different lives intersect. It's very good. I just have not had the time to read it in any significant chunks. I read, like, if I'm lucky, a chapter a night, but not even every night. So haven't quite gotten through that. But when I get through that, I'll give you guys a more in-depth review if you're interested. And then hopefully just hoping to finish another book for December. I've got a couple on my wish list, which I promised myself this year I wasn't going to add books to my wish list until I cleared it out. And I was pretty good about that. I think I've added a handful and read more than a handful off of it, so it balances out. But God, it's going to be hard to do that for another year, so I really got to get cracking on it. But those are my book reviews. Like I said, I had the idea to do like a little TikTok about it, so keep an eye out for that. And speaking of TikTok, you can follow us there and on Instagram at Don't Quote Us on that. And we are on Twitter at Don't Quote Us 27. Haven't been terribly active on Twitter, I'll be honest, but I have been retweeting some stuff. So if you guys want to chit chat or just see what I find is funny, check us out on Twitter. I think that's everything. I'm not making any promises about Elanor returning or speculations because clearly I don't know what I'm talking about. Everyone, have a safe and happy and healthy weekend. I will see you next time. Thanks for listening. Don't quote me on that. One day we'll have an outro, but it's not today.